Okay, well, I'm going to get started. My first comment, as always, as we do this lecture series, welcome to everyone. And if you like wildlife, I just want to stress that as we move forward, you have people. There are so many organizations in our area which support wildlife, and I think it would be great if you reached out to them or considered looked at their websites. They might have talks and walks near you. So the Orange County Audubon Society is one that has frequent talks and walks, but there are certainly others. The Bashkill Area Association protects a great wetland known as the Bashkill. I was talking about winter wildlife at Meek, which is an environmental center along the Bashkill. That is great. There are more bird clubs. There's the great Edgar Mearns Bird Club. Feel free to give a shout out if you'd like. But feel free to look up their events, their hikes, and the great expertise of birding that they have. There are other Audubon societies. There's one in Sullivan County. There's one in Pennsylvania, the Gifford Pinchot Audubon Society. There are Friends Group of the Shawangunk Grasslands and the Wallkill River. And you can be members of all of these. I certainly am. So these are great organizations and just lots of great people who probably share a lot of your interests. And so if you're looking for, people to get out with, hike with, to share their expertise on birding or just wildlife in general, just we live in such a great area. I always apologize. But I've traveled a little bit, and some of the places I've traveled are just, in all fairness, after a while, just a tiny bit boring. That they have birds and they're new birds to me, but they're nowhere near the diversity of wildlife that we have here. We're really, really lucky to have such a wonderful, wonderful area, and we should celebrate it. So if you want to get out and get to know our local biodiversity better, there's all of these local groups which can help you do that. Okay. Uh, the Galapagos Islands. Absolutely wonderful. If you're a biologist, what is not to love about, strolling down a trail and seeing this? But there's a lot more to it because it was observations of a young Charles Darwin at the Galapagos and other sites, which then opened, planted a seed of an idea, which then kind of changed the way we see the natural world. So that certainly deserves some comment. And then also we could talk about things like climate change. And so a difficult thing perhaps is how there's so many different ways that we could approach this, the wildlife of the Galapagos Islands. So I would like to just kind of try to do a little bit of all of them. All right, because they're also such interesting stories. Maybe start with a couple of specific animals, some of the ones we might know best, talk a little bit about them,
Okay.
but then talk about how they fit into our greater understanding of biology in general. Now, I lived in South America while I was in the Peace Corps. And while I was in the Peace Corps in the country of Paraguay, I took this picture. So here's a small tortoise from Paraguay. All right. And if you were to do genetic comparisons of tortoises, it turns out this is the closest living relative of the Galapagos tortoises you just saw. So the idea that would come to Darwin, and that we would now say, is somehow one of those tortoises got to the Galapagos and was the ancestor of these things that you see here. And so the different environment, the different predators or lack thereof, allowed the tortoise from the mainland to adapt in new ways. But especially, and this is something that Darwin noticed, Darwin who would ride on some of these tortoises, like this one is famous for having a quote saddle back. If you start looking at the differences of the shells, I think you might start to realize that, even they not only look different from the ones on the mainland, they look different from each other. Why? Well, the answer is simple because there's a bunch of different Galapagos Islands, and I have somewhere maps, and you'll see maps throughout these presentations, and they're different. So, what vegetation would you have on different islands? Well, there's cactuses which are tree-like here. All right, and so if you want to eat from here, having a longer neck would be a requirement because they grow to be more tree size. But then there are smaller cactuses as well. And so, I'm sorry, here's just a plug. Here's a little model of Charles Darwin and the Galapagos. So if you were to look at the Galapagos, there's a bunch of different islands here. And then what really kind of sparked Charles Darwin's imagination was someone told him, oh yeah, I can tell what island the turtle came from.
We are joined by Tracy Walder tonight, News Nation national security contributor and former CIA officer and FBI special agent. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us on this case.
What?
Okay. And so a native of the islands said that each island has its own individual shape of a tortoise shell. So not only then Charles Darwin was asking the question, where did these come from in general? Why are they different from the mainland? But now how could each island then be different to the point where you could recognize that? Well, I'd like to introduce a couple more animals and then get back to that question here. But I would like to then sadly say that not only are there uh, um, tortoises from each island, but then sometimes, as humans hunted them, because if you were a sailor that was going to be, away at sea for 3 years at a time, Darwin's voyage was 3 years long. This is not only a great source of meat, but also of water. And so they could just harvest all of these tortoises and hang them upside down in the bottom of the ships. And, if you were a sailor, not quite sure where your meal was coming from, then, you can see the advantage of that. And so this is a member, the last living member before it died, of one of the species of Galapagos tortoise. And for a long time, it was kept in captivity. They called it Lonesome George. One of the guides from the National Geographic tour that I went on as a child, they got to see Lonesome George, and that was the thing. They were scouring the islands, looking for a possible mate, and then including, mixing this species with female tortoises from other islands, but it never reproduced. And then when it died, its species passed, just to show you how unique that was. I'd like to talk about speciation in just a minute. Let's introduce a couple more typical Galapagos species. So there are iguanas in South America. But if you go to the Galapagos, you see a couple of new iguanas. All right, so these are not typical of the green iguanas that you have elsewhere. They look different. They get a little bit larger. All right, so you can see this. And there's a couple of land iguanas. I'll get to the marine one in just a second. But there is this one that you can find all throughout the Galapagos. But then there's a species that only lives on this island, nowhere else in the world and nowhere else in the Galapagos. And then there's one that only lives on one volcano in this island, nowhere else in the Galapagos, and thus nowhere else in the world. And if you've ever seen like lava flows are impossible to walk. It's just like all of this jagged rock. So they really do serve as barriers. So like if you're on one side of a lava flow, it's like being on one side of a big river or a rocky canyon. It really would limit movement. So these are neat iguanas, but even neater, if you don't mind my saying, are these, because from those land iguanas, some of them adapted to now feed not on vegetation on land, but rather on algae in the water. So here we see marine iguanas, and because there's so much black lava by the shore, their darker coloration allows them to camouflage better. They've got strong grasping claws, so they can grasp on these lava rocks. And one of the neat things, if you're ever thinking of going to Galapagos, just this will come up a couple of times. I've traveled and I've been on bird walks where everyone will say, look, everyone get your binoculars, get your scope. Look, there's a really cool animal that we can see way over there. And everybody looks. In the Galapagos, they swim next to you. All right, so they don't really know predators. And so that's just you're swimming along, and all of a sudden, a sea turtle with a 5-foot shell just swims alongside you. And elsewhere you can look through the binoculars and see the sea turtles. But here you're living among them, and it's really, really special. Here you can see a marine iguana. Feeding on algae. But they exist nowhere else in the world. So the land iguanas are unique to Galapagos, and from the land iguanas come this marine iguana species, which also is unique to um, to the Galapagos. And here you can see them. They can dive underwater, and then they feed on the green algae, which they find along the rocks. And here you can see some of these um, uh, he's eating. Just maybe a couple more examples, and then I'll just get to the big picture that why this is important. Then we'll get back to the wildlife. You can see other things as well. Sea lions, wonderful. Once again, not too used to predators and things, and so you can go up to them. Now the big males, they're kind of like scary big, so like I wouldn't necessarily do that, but how friendly can you get with these? Well, you're walking along and they're just hanging out by the beach. Or, if you want to bond with them, as I obviously did, they're all laying down. You can lay down next to them. All right, so that's me just laying down, and just, we're bonding over, just being here. How unique are these? Well, we don't consider them necessarily a different species, but some people do. So this group is kind of unique to the Galapagos, as are the Galapagos fur seal. So the last one was a sea lion. This is a fur seal. So everywhere you go, you see this great wildlife. Some of it looks very little like what you would see on the mainland. Some looks a whole lot like what you would see on the mainland, but still some differences. And so that kind of begs the question, where did this come from? Now, this is a great question for the Galapagos, but I'd like to just kind of step back for a second. We'll get back to Galapagos and ask the bigger question, where did all of this come from? So if you were to look out the window, we see trees, we see gray squirrels, we see blue jays, we see people, we see all of this. Where did they come from? Why are they the way they are? All right, just like the iguanas had grasping claws or black colors, or the tortoises were so big, or were all of these features. We get asked the same about woodpeckers. Why are woodpeckers so good at their woodpecking? Why are hawks so good at this? How did they get to be that way? And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this. That is not only a fundamental question, it is, as far as we know, the oldest question. Now, I'm sure this isn't the oldest question. I'm sure people were always asking questions, since there were people. But if you ask, what is the earliest philosophical debate that was written down? Like when people were arguing about an idea, what is the oldest one that we know of? The oldest one we know of is evolution versus design. It's the very oldest of the Greek philosophers that we know of. Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, who were having this argument. Later ones like Democritus were as well. So where did the stuff you look outside the window, where did it come from? That, as far as we know, is the oldest question we have record of. So fascinating, fascinating. Now, it turns out, going back to the beginning, there were different ideas. And in science, different ideas are great, right? Don't listen to your instructors. Don't listen to what you read in the book. Down, question, come up with new ideas. That's your job. So coming up with new ideas, that's actually what we want you to do. And if there's two alternate ideas, we say, oh, here's one idea, here's a different idea. That's great. Now we can test them, all right, and maybe learn something about the natural world. So going back to the beginning, and then even today, one idea is when you look out the window and you see blue jays or woodpeckers or whatever, and you ask, why are they there? Why do they have the features that they do? One reason is that, well, that's because they've always been that way. That if you were to go back to the beginning of Earth, you would have seen these things. You would have seen blue jays and woodpeckers just like they are today. Why? Because things don't change. That was one of the big tenets forever. Things don't change. That, not that long ago, life started. It looked pretty much just like what you see outside the window today. Yeah, maybe there was a dinosaur or two that disappeared, but like all the stuff we see today, they go back to the beginning. So if you asked the question, where do frogs come from, for example? Well, the answer, especially once people started digging up fossils, is like, I don't really care whether you call these rocks Triassic or Jurassic or Devonian. It doesn't matter, because every kind of frog would have been, in each one. So bullfrogs, you would have seen bullfrogs when the dinosaurs were alive. You would have seen bullfrogs in what we call the Paleozoic rocks. That bullfrogs always would have been there. We talk about fish like bass. Where do bass come from? Well, once again, one of the models would have been, there have always been bass. There have always been sharks. There have always been everything. Everything alive today has always existed, and it will exist more or less until the end of time. In fact, a lot of people felt life couldn't change. I don't really feel like getting into this tonight, but we could get into Plato's analogy of the cave if you wanted. Like Plato would argue, you can't really change a gray squirrel because that's not really the gray squirrel. The essence of the gray squirrel is this otherworldly stuff on some other plane. So one of the ideas was life doesn't change. When it first appeared, it's just like it was today, and it is impossible for it to be different. And that's what, by Darwin's day, most people believed. In part because for a long time, if you held a different idea, you could be like thrown in prison or, be forced to recant or something. In fact, Darwin's grandfather, a great, perhaps the greatest doctor of his day, in fact, so great, King George III asked Erasmus Darwin to be his own personal physician, and he said no, not something that many people said to King George III, because, in part because he was a friend of Benjamin Franklin and was kind of like supportive of this American colonial experiment going on. But anyway, Erasmus Darwin had some musings about evolution and found that his medical treatise, which was the most impressive of his day, got put on the list of banned books because of it. So, some of these ideas were unpopular, but to jump forward, Charles Darwin would say things which were just so controversial, and I apologize for being so controversial at the beginning, but I'm just going to read a statement. Great as the differences between the breeds of pigeon, I'm fully convinced that all are descended from the rock pigeon Columba livia. Now, I'm going to just give everyone a moment. If you want to shout and scream and react violently, the idea that pigeons have evolved from doves. Okay, no one's shouting and screaming, so perhaps that isn't too controversial. But it was in the 1860s. He is saying life does change. Pigeons haven't always existed. This is a new thing. There are natural mechanisms where a new species could come about. His book was titled The Origin of Species. And it is so well accepted that it's not controversial. All right. Yeah. Even the people who say, I don't agree with Darwin. Well, you disagree with, the things in his book. Oh, no, I agree with that. So this is now just a fundamental idea of biology that life can change over time. But it was Darwin who helped establish that. That was not what people thought in this time period. So let's get back to the Galapagos sea lions. Here we get to see this because, and I'm going to stress that you don't have to listen to biologists, because you know what? Science is about testing new ideas. You never have to believe it. If you believe things that I say or anyone says, you're doing it wrong. But plus, biologists are still trying to figure out. So these guys are a little bit unique to Galapagos, but are they so unique that this should be considered a subspecies of the Galapagos, separate from the ones you would find in California, let's say? Well, some biologists think yes, and some people no. So the people who study this, there's differences between this and the other species, but is it so great that its own separate species? Some are on the yes side, some are on the no side. That's okay. It's okay to disagree and let's test this and let's agree. But in any case, maybe this is a new subspecies. This next one, many think that this is a whole new species. I don't think everyone is, completely on board with this fur seal. But the idea is we're actually seeing this. All right, people used to think that, of course, species are immutable. One could never evolve into another. But here you can see we can't even agree as to whether something is a different subspecies or not, or whether it's just a subspecies or a different species or not. I'll give you a whole bunch more examples. But here, this is just beautiful. We're seeing evolution in place. There is new variety in the life on Earth. Which is appearing. So let me go back to just kind of talking about how wonderful this wildlife is, but I'm going to weave that idea into the theme. Here is a green sea turtle. Right? Once again, this is more similar to what you would see off of, say, California, off the coast of South America. But it is considered to be a different species, although not everyone is 100% on that. Once again, it's in the process of changing. And when it crosses that species line where it's isolated from others, we haven't quite decided. Now, at some point, I have to talk about currents. So I'm going to, just also talk about why the Galapagos is so wonderful. So let me talk about currents, because this brought home the El Nino and La Nina phenomena to me in a way that nothing else ever had. There's a current. You can see all the bubbles moving. If you were swimming next to the sea turtle, so that's like they just come up next to you. Like I was swimming against the current, the sea turtle was too, and it was like we were bonding. Like, huh, tough work swimming against this current, right? But you can see the bubbles. If you're swimming against it, you get the idea. Like this is something you have to swim against. This current is a real deal. It's coming up from Antarctica. And as it comes up from Antarctica, it brings all of these nutrients. And that's why the algae is so green here. All of these nutrients from the Antarctic waters lets this algae flourish. All right. And then everything that eats the algae, all right, from the fishes to the turtles to the marine iguanas, they can flourish. And then you've got all of these things that can eat them, including many of the birds, etc. But currents change. And this is a big thing with El Nino and La Nina. In El Nino years, that stops because just the shift of temperature on the planet, currents redirect themselves. This current does not come from the South Pole and hit the Galapagos. So this marine ecosystem crashes. Now, this is a natural phenomenon, but there are times where just you have, I've been told, just hundreds of dead marine iguana skeletons just on the ground because there is no longer any green algae to feed them. That a lot of these populations crash. On land, when I was there, the water was doing great, but the land was super dry and the land organisms weren't doing too good. When you go to El Nino years, you get more rain. So now the land turns really green. And so the land stuff is doing great and these fluctuate. The marine isn't. So these currents and El Nino and La Nina are very important. And as the climate changes, we're seeing El Nino events come more frequently and more severe. So as we look at what this wildlife has to wrestle with, the climate and how it affects the currents, which feed this whole entire ecosystem, that is something. Okay. But there's more wildlife. So just, I'm planting all of these seeds, but you'll see there's a lot of current themes here. One thing that has disappointed me a little bit is I used to think that I liked scarlet tanagers. All right, and some of you might think so too. Big scarlet birds, beautiful, beautiful, the males, black wings. If you think you like scarlet tanagers, hate to break this to you, you don't. Okay, they're actually cardinals. So if you do genetic testing, tanagers are a family of birds, mostly from South America, and our scarlet tanagers aren't in that group. So our scarlet tanagers are really cardinals. There are things called cardinals and cardinalias, which are really tanagers, and these are called Darwin's finches. They're really tanagers. And so as we study things with genetics, sometimes we say, ooh, we called them this group of birds because of their beaks. But it turns out when you can look at their genes, we come up with a slightly different classification for them. And that's just all kind of good and fun. So Darwin's finches are famous, famous, famous. But to be honest, I'm going to get to the mockingbird, the cormorant, and I mentioned the turtles. We'll get back to them. They deserve more attention. So Darwin's finches, iconic. But to be honest, this wasn't what gave Darwin the idea. After Darwin already had his ideas, he thought, hey, maybe this applies to the finches that I observed too. And it turned out he didn't really collect these. He had to borrow from the captain and the captain's collection. So when I talk about evolution and the seed that planted it, I'll get to like the mockingbirds, the lava lizards. They were the ones that really gave Darwin the idea, not the finches. So look at this beak of this bird. Like that's a beak. Okay. But it turns out it's related to birds which have smaller beaks. And there's a whole bunch of these things, which are now called Darwin's finches. We know them to be tanagers, which are only found in the Galapagos. And they have, a variety of niches that they go in. They have a variety of, welcome. Nice to see you again. Um, and they have a variety of beak shapes. And this would be, once again, something that you could see that there would be different islands. On this island, you could see these finches, these finches, these finches. And so getting back to did these always exist? With Darwin's idea of, wait, maybe species can become, Now the idea is, well, maybe from mainland South American birds, tanagers, come the ancestor of these, and then they spread out to all of these different islands, and then they become all of these diverse species here. One of the sad things is because now not only do they only exist in the Galapagos, but some only exist on certain islands. One of the great dangers is that they can become extinct, right? Because they're not all throughout Ecuador. They're just on one of the Galapagos Islands, perhaps. And we talk about invasive species. Invasive species can bother anybody, but if you're a rare species adapted to a really narrow ecological niche, a new species coming in could be devastating. So it turns out there's a fly that lays its eggs in the inside baby birds, and like they can develop in like the nostrils, so the baby birds can't breathe because there's like little wormy maggots in their nostrils here. And it is such a common fly now. It's an invasive species. They're trying to get rid of it, but they're afraid that some of these birds are going to disappear just because they can't, control the fly to the degree that they would need to. So all throughout the Galapagos, here are examples where like mainland South America has none of these. So somehow they changed from the mainland, but then somehow they changed on this island of the Galapagos compared to that island, compared to that island. So life is in the process of becoming as these things, and we'll mention this, adapted to the various conditions on the different islands, because some have trees and big vegetation, some don't have trees. So there's all sorts of different things that these birds adapt to. Okay. Same thing here with the lava lizards, and this was one of the ones that Darwin noticed. So we got these little lizards, often darker color, because they're blending in with the. I think that's me. No, so I'm just trying to figure out the music source. Okay, I did. So here you can see some coloration differences. Darwin noticed that I go to these different islands and the lizards look a little different on this island than that one. Once again, how does Galapagos have lizards that don't look like the mainland? But now, how does each island have its own different species? Darwin started thinking there has to be a way. I don't think that these have existed from all time, and only are found on this one little island. What would be another way um, for these to get around? So there are different species living on different islands here. So this species only lives on San Cristobal here, and you can get the layout here. A couple of other things. There's a unique penguin in the Galapagos that hugs that current. So once again, if the current comes up, the algae bloom, then the fish that eat the algae bloom. And if you're a penguin, you like to eat fish, you also like cold water. This water has come up from Antarctica. This is great. And so this species is recognized by most to be a Galapagos specific species. Once again, we could argue, is it a subspecies or a species? Most recognize it as a species that's only found in the Galapagos. And once again, just you're snorkeling along and there's a penguin swimming next to you. And it's just, the Galapagos is just a wonderful, wonderful experience here. I think they actually a couple came up. It almost looked like they were swimming towards you. The sea lions certainly do that. Well, the sea lions play with you sometimes. Will swim right at your face, and at the last minute they'll just go around and they're just having fun. The penguins are doing that a little bit. So you'll see penguins in the water in the Galapagos. Okay. I'll just do a couple more and then kind of recap the diversity. Mockingbirds in the Galapagos may not strike you as being, spectacular, and you may not mind bringing them up. But Darwin noticed them. He noticed the mockingbirds I see on this island were different from the others. So if you're asking what planted the seed in Darwin, that evolution was a thing, that things could change over time. The tortoises certainly were. Mockingbirds in the Galapagos were. And then maybe a couple other things like the lava lizards. The later things came like finches came later. Once he said, I have an idea here, then he started noticing connections earlier. But if you're asking who planted the seed that would fundamentally change biology, you might not think much of these mockingbird species, different ones on different islands. But they were the ones that, helped Darwin come to this realization. So if you're out in nature, I mean, who knows what you'll notice and what chord that will strike. And so this one here is definitely a different species on a different island than the one you saw at the beginning of the video. Here is a cormorant. Now, look at the wings. Those wings look puny. Those feathers are so small, it can't fly. And you almost feel sorry for it. Like, oh, I mean, flying is so essential to being a bird. This poor little bird, it can't fly. You only find it in this part of the Galapagos. But then you realize, wait, if you're a cormorant, there's actually a lot to love about not being able to fly because flight feathers trap air. And if you're a cormorant, you're diving after fish. And the more air you've trapped in your feathers, the more buoyant you are. All right, you will eat better if you can't fly. All right, because you'll be able to swim after the fish. So this was an adaptation for the style of life that it had, unique from the cormorants that you would see once again other places like um, mainland South America. So whether it be we biologists, whether it be young students, whether it be Darwin a century and a half ago, you start to realize if you're isolated, you can't have sex with someone that lives on the mainland. Like if you're stuck on an island, you aren't having kids with someone on the mainland. Or if you're on this island, maybe you're not having sex with someone on the other island. If you're a lizard, all right, it's not easy to go island hopping, right? Even some birds. And if the islands are different, this one has trees and this one doesn't, then maybe some of those finches are adapting to how to get food on this island, where the other finches are adapting on how to get food on this island. And then over time, there is changing. All right. Now we're accustomed to that. We've seen like dogs. All right. Once upon a time, there were no dogs, there were wolves, though. Humans took wolves and they said, ooh, this would be nice if, they could be good at herding sheep. They could be better at guarding, houses at night or whatever. Ooh, horses. Wouldn't it be great if this one was better at pulling a plow? Wouldn't it be great if this one was better at racing? Ooh, apples. Wouldn't it be great if this one had a bigger fruit that was sweeter? Broccoli. Wouldn't it be great if it did more of this, etc.? Humans now appreciate we've been changing life over a long period of time, but life can change. But here we see evidence that life changes naturally. That's a seagull, but it's black, making sense if you're hanging around black lava rocks. All right. So if you were white, it would be awfully easy for predators to find you. Right. So when you look at the Galapagos, you see all these things that look familiar. Gulls are familiar. You've seen them in mainland South America, as you have with iguanas and tortoises, but you haven't seen these. So somehow they got here, in storms, like driftwood gets, blown to islands where there's like little scared animals hugging onto, the branches or whatever. And so then they changed from those in the mainland because they could no longer mate with the ones on the mainland. So they changed independently. And then perhaps even from one island to another. So this is one of the things that makes the Galapagos so wonderful. The Galapagos hawk, you won't find anywhere else. The lava gull, you won't find anywhere else, etc. But it also just kind of gives us into a window of this changing over time. Now, before something is a new species, it's a subspecies, or maybe even almost a subspecies, a different race. And we see plenty of that too. This is not a different species of flamingo. All right, but it is considered a different subspecies found only in the Galapagos. So maybe some of these make it to mainland South America and they mate there, but it's becoming less and less common. The ones that are native to the Galapagos, they tend to stay in the Galapagos. So not only is it wonderful to see flamingos, and I'll say a word or two just about them in a second, but also they're in the process of becoming something new. All right, perhaps a species of flamingo the Earth has never seen before. Now, just a quick thing on flamingos. A lot of bird pigments are gotten from what they eat. All right, so when we see a Baltimore oriole or a goldfinch or a scarlet tanager, they don't make red pigments. They eat them and then put them into their feathers. So a lot of the ones I just mentioned, they get it from the berries that they eat, which are red or orange. Flamingos and a couple of other birds, they do it from the crustaceans which ate colored algae. So there's all of these algae in the ocean called dinoflagellates that have pigments, just like some algae are green, some are orange, some are yellow. They have all these pigments. So the invertebrates eat them, and that's what makes shrimp look pinkish. And then you have birds which eat a lot of those. They can now incorporate those pinker pigments um, into their feathers. And one other thing, not only do you do, I think this is funny. Not only can they like make pink in their feathers to attract a mate, because it's nice to like show your potential mate what species you belong to. Like with ducks, like if it's mating season in spring, you want to have sex, but like there's all of these different species of duck on the lake. Who do you have sex with? You don't want to have sex with that species or that species. You want to have sex with yours. So the colors are good just to, be a signaling factor, like, I'm in this group versus that group. But some of the colors show how healthy you are. If these colors are coming from what you ate, like if you're a cardinal or a scarlet tanager or a goldfinch or a Baltimore oriole, a female looks at males and says, "Look, you're brighter orange than the other ones. You've eaten better. You're a healthier male. You're perhaps a better mate choice than that one whose colors are a little drabber." I like this because I never knew this until I got there. In addition to when they make their feathers, they put pink pigment in, but they then also use their preen oil gland. So birds have a gland that other animals don't. It's at the base of the tail, and it makes preen oil, which they put on their feathers and help maintain their feathers. So feathers get dusty, feathers get damaged, and this just helps upkeep feathers. But they can also then put other things in the feathers too. So there's pink pigments that they can put on top as well. And it's kind of like applying makeup before you go out. Like you're like, okay, so I kind of look the way I'm going to look, but if I'm going to go out, looking for a date, why don't I just freshen up a little bit, just, a little more just to be extra, a little impressive. So you're seeing them preening their feathers for a couple of reasons, but also just making them a little extra pink, perhaps to be just a little extra impressive there. Okay. Um, so I know yellow warblers. I know a lot of people in this room know yellow warblers. So yellow warblers are great. And so I saw this bird and I'm like, ooh, I just found a new species of warbler. This is great. And I was told, no, that's a yellow warbler. And I'm like, no, it can't be. Like it has to be, sure, you can use that common name, but it has to be a different species. And no, that's a yellow warbler, just like we have. As are these next ones that are gray. Look at that gray. Or like if I ask you what's that, you wouldn't say that's a yellow warbler, right? Because our yellow warblers are yellow. But here there's an awful lot of gray. And here we're seeing subspecies. All right. Now, this Galapagos species is not the only subspecies. Like in the south of the US, there are yellow warblers that have like orangey things going on that would strike you as odd. But here's just a sign. You may say, I know the species of yellow warbler. All right. But you go to the Galapagos, and here it still could mate with our yellow warblers and produce offspring. But to be honest, it's probably not likely to. These are probably most likely to mate with other Galapagos birds. So they're starting to separate. We don't consider them to be different species yet, but they're on their way. We expect that, potentially someday in the future, we recognize the yellow warblers of our area don't really interact with these yellow warblers because after a certain point, maybe the females of our area who like their males singing sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. Maybe the Galapagos males sing a little differently or have an accent, and our females would be like, nah, that's not the type of song that interests me. And at that point, if you're not reproducing together, you're a separate species, right? Even if you live together, you're no longer interacting. So once again, it's just a joy to see, like, I thought that was a different bird, but here it is, yellow warblers are changing. All right, and there you can actually just see it. Here's speciation actually occurred. I also look at this behavior. All right, I know I've got birders in the room. Like, do you see yellow warblers hanging out in groups like this? Because I don't. All right, it was just wonderful. I saw more yellow warblers in the Galapagos than I ever did because you'd see groups of like 20 of them. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like maybe Cape May, you get big groups. But this was just, yeah, they behave differently. They're social in a way that our yellow warblers weren't. Okay. And I'll just, kind of zip through because there's a lot to know about the Galapagos. We could see subspecies of lots of things. Here's a noddy tern. It's a different subspecies than you would find outside the Galapagos. Here's a white-cheeked pintail duck. That's a different species than what you would see elsewhere. And here you see the brown pelicans, once again, a different species. These birds are wonderful because they do the plunge diving in order to capture their prey. And here you can see them doing that. Oh, I'm sorry. I see there's a chat question. No problem. Is that the last one? Okay. Oh, flamingos are insane. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Extremely harsh conditions. You're right. Good point. Good point. Actually, I think these guys are about to mate, if I remember. Yeah. So if you've ever seen, yeah, pelicans mate. Why don't we get our bunnies worth here? There we go. And so there's a lot of birds in Galapagos that you'll only find there. But then all of a sudden you say great blue heron. And you're like, yeah, so that's not even a different subspecies. It's just, no, that's just a regular old great blue heron. And they could mate with our great blue herons, no problem. All right. The same is true of frigate birds, which you could see down south. So I was stressing the uniqueness of like new species coming about. But let me just kind of switch gears because that's not the only thing that's great about wildlife, new species, nor the Galapagos. So frigate birds are not only in the Galapagos, but the Galapagos offer great breeding grounds for them. So a very large percent of the Pacific populations breed in the Galapagos. So even though it's not like they're unique there, nevertheless, the Galapagos is critically important there. None of the animals. Okay, thank you. Excellent point, Professor Borko. The animals are not adapting, the environment is. So the populations are adapting. So I don't have the choice of getting a bigger bill or a different color or whatever, but if there's variation in the population, in certain environmental conditions, some are more successful than others. And when you come back generations later, the population has changed and adapted to those environments. Thank you, Marty. And so here you see the frigate birds, but the exciting thing is if you were to go to the Galapagos, you can see the males here, and there's a couple different species of a frigate bird here, right? And here you can see that they have this pouch called a gular that they can inflate, all right, and they can rattle their wings. And so what you'll see here, the males are on the ground, and they're attracting the females, which you may not, think this is the greatest display, but female frigate birds think this is the bomb. And they just fly over, and they've got a lot of males to pick from. And so they're just going to select, like, ooh, I like the way this one is displaying. And males can fight among each other because if you're in a big patch of males, being close to the middle is arguably a better place to secure a mate than being kind of out on the outskirts. And so we can see some competition here, and there is a frigate bird, a chick here. All right, so the Galapagos is a great place for birds that aren't unique to the Galapagos, but nevertheless could be very important in breeding. So, things like an oyster catcher, once again, not unique to the Galapagos, but it's important for those populations, especially in La Nina years when we get so many of the fish, thanks to the algal bloom. So a lot of these birds, this would be a stellar year for them. This whimbrel would feel the same. Okay. Then there are birds which are not unique to the Galapagos, but once again, this is a major habitat for them, a major breeding site for them, and these would be the boobies. There are a number of different species. The blue-footed boobies, they're the most famous, but there are different boobies as well, like the Nazca boobies, the red-footed boobies, and when I was in Baja California earlier this year, brown boobies, which I don't think are found on the Galapagos. So this is not unique to them. Blue pigment is interesting in birds in that birds do. Okay, there's so many birds. Huh. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so, Hawaii, the short-eared owls or barn owls. That's interesting. So, Lark, you've seen the same things. That just like seeing a yellow warbler in the Galapagos might look a little different. Seeing a bird in Hawaii, you would see differences than one you know. Thank you very much. I have not been to Hawaii. So, birds don't make blue pigments. They have to, and it's what's called a structural pigment. So I know this is a little weird, but I just have to make a little aside. Like if you take a red shirt, grind it up, the powder is red. If you take a red cardinal feather, grind it up, the powder is red. So red cardinal feathers have red pigments. You can see it in the powder. But if you take a blue jay or a bluebird feather, grind it up, it's brown. All right, ground up bluebird feathers aren't blue. That's because blue is a structural pigment. It's not like a molecule like a dye. It's the way that the cells and the pigment um, parts of the cells are structurally arranged that refract light and cause interference, like soap bubbles. Soap bubbles, oil bubbles look like they have colors, like iridescent colors, but oil doesn't have those colors. Soap doesn't have those colors. It's the way that light interferes as it bounces off that gives that appearance. So the same thing with blue-footed boobies. They are getting pigments from the fish that they eat. Um, but it's the way that the pigments are structurally arranged in their feet. And so, unfortunately, that's a baby booby I'll get to. So if you have a young booby here, notice the feet are gray. And if you took a booby's feet and you just kind of put some pressure on them, I don't want to say bruise them in a way that you would hurt the bird, but you would then change the color. It wouldn't look blue anymore. It would look gray like this. If a blue-footed booby was not feeding well, it would have gray feet. All right, so it's the molecules in the fish that it eats that they get from their invertebrates that get structurally arranged a certain way that give this blue that give the blue food here. If you see a difference in color, some of them are paler than others. The males are a little paler than the females. Right? Ooh, Hawaii has blue-footed boobies. Great. Yeah, California does as well. Mexico does as well. So they are not unique to the Galapagos, but the Galapagos is important. Which then gets to mating, all right? Because if you're going to pick a mate, you want the mate to be healthy. And if the blue in the feet is tied to their diet, then both males and females, they then display. All right, so this is them courting, and notice what they're doing with their feet. This is, they're showing off their feet to their partner. Look how blue my feet are. Oh yeah, nice feet. Look how blue my feet are. Once again, the one with the slightly darker blue, that's the female. Even like maybe here's a stick. Look at me, I'd be great at finding sticks for nesting material. And so here are some of their courtship rituals. So, that's fun in and of itself. And once again, there's the Galapagos is a great place for them to nest. Now, there are different species of booby, and you'll find different ones on different islands. So like the red-footed boobies are more on the mainland side, more on the eastern side, where you'll find those. So here you can see this is a second species of booby. And even some of those look just like there's different colors of dog. All right. And I'll show you in a second, there were different colors of sea turtle. Red-footed boobies, they just have these two different colors. One's lighter, one's darker. So here's the darker more. So variation exists in populations. And then this variation can, under certain circumstances, then be selected for and then become, what have give rise to different subspecies as well. And so here you can see some males fighting with each other. Somewhere I've got video of that. Uh-huh. 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 I like that when when you know who their relatives are and you see like, ooh, I see a little of your relative in you. Like I know who you're related to. Um, and then I'll mention aquatic life quickly and then maybe get back to the big themes for today. But if you're in the Galapagos, it's such an amazing thing because you're in the Pacific, you've got these ocean currents, but you've got all of these islands here. So there's a diversity of whales that you can observe. I went with so good question. Why are the blue feet beneficial to boobies? So I don't know necessarily that they are. I don't know that cardinals have to be red. I don't know that Baltimore Orioles have to be orange. But there is a benefit in number one, showing that you're a blue-footed booby and not a red-footed booby, so that species aren't trying to have mate with the wrong species. But then also the fact that you can advertise what a great potential catch you are to a potential partner. Look at how healthy I am. So I don't think they have to be blue, but I think that that blue color both allows for species recognition and for the attraction of mate and the advertising of health. So I think it serves for that, but it doesn't have to be like when you look at duck patterns. Like a mallard doesn't have to have a green head, all right? But I think that just setting it apart from other species and having a way to signal female mallards of how healthy you are, I think that's a benefit to it. So that would be my best answer here. So if you were in the Galapagos, you would see whales. There's another species of booby called a Nazca booby, right? They're a little more on cliff faces. I wasn't able to get as close to them. So let me just kind of go to my playlist because I'd like to, at some point, just kind of wrap up on the big themes. There are bugs that are there's bees that are only found in the Galapagos. There are scorpions, which are almost only found in the Galapagos. There are certainly plenty of plants that are only found in the Galapagos. And so if you were just interested in biology in general or how new species arise, you just these, cactus trees are found on the Galapagos, nowhere else, as are many of the plants. Just a wonderful, wonderful place to be. We could go underwater and say the same thing. So I scuba dive, and sometimes being a scuba diver, I don't feel like snorkeling because I want like more of an adventure. Scuba, yes, snorkeling, but then there are places where you can snorkel where it is as exciting as scuba diving. Like Florida has some coral reefs, like near Pennicamp at the base of the Keys. Snorkeling there is absolutely wonderful. And snorkeling in the Galapagos, like this marble ray was huge. It was almost as big as I was. And so you just get to swim next to all of these great things. And another neat thing is if you have swum in the Caribbean, all right, you see, oh, okay, I'm seeing parrotfish just like I see in the Caribbean. I'm seeing these surgeonfish just like I have in the Caribbean, but maybe I'm seeing different ones. All right, so just like, like the birds you might recognize from the South American mainland or the tortoises, you might say the same about the fish. There are sergeant majors in the Caribbean, but they look a little bit different than the sergeant majors here, et cetera. So I have a bunch on the fish here. Before I get to the last of the, it's a power. The last of this. So, the idea of speciation. We could get this anywhere because life is changing all around us, but the Galapagos is just wonderful. So let me just kind of highlight. We see variations. Some sea turtles have a darker morph and some have a lighter morph. All right. So within a species, there can be variation. Within a single lava lizard species, you can have a dark morph and a light morph. So these are the same species, but just like dogs can come in different colors, so can lava lizards. The red-footed boobies, some are a lighter morph, some are a darker morph. Now, if you're isolated, like on a Galapagos island, does that now mean you are definitely a different subspecies or a different species? Well, no. And we would know this because when we write species names out, we have what's called the genus species, a term where this is the genus term, right, of the smooth-billed Annie. And then here we see the species name. Now notice they're the same. So on the Galapagos, do you have something different from in South America in general? No. They're the same species and subspecies. Same with Nazca boobies, same with the Sally Lightfoot crab, same with the American oyster catcher. So you don't have to be a different species just because you're on an island. You could be the same species as what found on the mainland. But over time, if you're isolated and reproducing less and less with the mainland group and more with the ones on the island, now some of those differences might start to become established in your population where you now are recognized as a different subspecies. So the brown pelican, notice on the Galapagos, that's the subspecies name, whereas in South America, in Western South America, that's the subspecies name. Same species, occidentalis, but now a different subspecies. Blue-footed boobies in the Galapagos Islands, considered a different subspecies. The yellow warblers, considered a different subspecies. The white-cheeked pintail, once again, a different subspecies, etc. Okay, great blue heron. Some people consider this to be a different subspecies than what you would find elsewhere. But I do want to stress, you don't have to believe me. In fact, if you believe anything I say, you're doing it wrong. All right, we scientists are just trying to understand the natural world, so you should doubt and should question. And if scientists do that, that's good. They're doing their job. So here, is this a different subspecies or not? Some feel it is. Some people who study flamingos say that this is a different subspecies than that, but not all agree, and that's okay. The brown noddy, not all agree that it's a different subspecies, and that's okay. The lava heron, people vary. Is it a different subspecies or should it be recognized as a whole different species? People vary, and that's fine. But there are conventions of, hey, we study these birds or whatever, and they'll publish papers, they'll have conventions, and sometimes they even vote. Right, this ornithological union or whatever has now just voted to make this, instead of a subfamily of this family, its own separate family, as biologists try to better understand the world. Once again, some people vary. Is this sea lion a different subspecies or a whole different species? Is this sea turtle? So Marty Borko's in the audience. Obviously, you recognize Agassiz, a great biologist and geologist from Europe. The biology club at AUK was called the Agassiz Society for years and years. Are these different species or different subspecies? And then I've always considered these to be different species, and on the Galapagos, that's what they consider them. But I've read more and more of the biologists now, consider them as different subspecies. So, but that's fine. As we try to understand it, the point goes back to Darwin. Darwin said something that doesn't shock us. He says pigeons evolved from doves, that there weren't pigeons at the beginning of life on Earth. Doves changed over time to give us something new, the pigeon. And then Darwin studied barnacles. Darwin studied a lot of things, and then made it's not just pigeons. He said, this is what we see here. This is what we see here. He said, this is where species come from. When you look outside the window, all right, we don't expect that blue jays go back to the beginning of time, that pileated woodpeckers go back to the beginning of time, that dogs do, that people do, that oak trees do. In fact, this is a mechanism which seems to apply to speciation in general. And he came up with steps like, if you have an enormous ability to reproduce, but there's not enough food or there's not enough shelter or whatever, then not everyone lives long enough to reproduce of their own. So only some individuals are passing on their genes. If individuals vary and these variations can be passed down through genes, then you would automatically expect to see change over time. Once again, that's not controversial to us, but at his day, and for the 1500 years prior, most people had felt that change over time was impossible. So that the life that you see, it has always been that way, and it will always be that way. But thanks to Darwin and others, it wasn't just he who was promoting evolution, that the world is changing, it's becoming, and these species have descended from other ancestors. And so now we look at life differently. All right, we humans are modified primates. Mammals are modified reptiles. Reptiles are modified animals, and modified amphibians. And now this just gives us this great insight into how our natural world is in the process of becoming. It is not static. And it's interesting, at the same time, other people were learning the same thing. The geologists were realizing that. And it's like, hey, these mountains and rivers and oceans, they haven't always existed. New mountains pop up. All right, oceans move, continents move. That came a little later. But that the geological world is in the process of becoming. The astronomers were seeing that, and they were saying, like things are moving in space. We now know, galaxies are spreading out, new stars are born, stars like that. The stuff we see in the sky is in the process of becoming. This is a way of looking at the natural world fundamentally different than what people did for about 1500 years. And the Galapagos Islands, they had their place in planting the seed for the realization of one of the most fundamental ideas in modern biology. If you ever get a chance to go, truly, truly wonderful. You can go lots of different ways. I cheat because if you go with like a really reputable company, they just take care of everything. You don't have to worry. But like, they meet you at the airport, they drop you off at the airport. They so National Geographic affiliates with a cruise line called Lindblad. I highly recommend them. They were originally among the first to try to do these ecological tours. So they just have a great catalog of trips if you ever get a chance to check them out. I'd like to thank you for coming. In the future weeks, we'll do topics like bugs and the insect diversity which we have around us, and some of the problems that they face. Aquatic life in the area around us. Those would be the next 2 weeks. And then, as March starts, we're going to talk about spring amphibians, right when it should be a little warmer, and maybe the amphibians are crossing the road to mate, and then bald eagles right around the time that maybe the bald eagles are starting to nest. So it would be great if you could join for future talks. If that's not a convenient time, I do record these and I put them on a playlist on my YouTube channel. Feel free to reach out to me to get a recording, or to Dorothy. Thank you so very much for coming. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shout them out. Otherwise, have a wonderful time. For here, people in the room, I was inspired to write a song inspired by the blue-footed boobies, or boobies in general. So I'm going to. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, you know what? So if anyone, this is the second time this has come up. Audubon should be sending out uh, a, um, a list of talks and walks. If you haven't gotten it,